I made this 90-second animation in 16 days, and I want to share how I managed to actually get it done, talk about the challenges I faced, and I'm going to answer a bunch of questions I've received as well. Before I get into it, I want to shout out Hellivision Television Network, because the reason I made this short was to submit it to one of their animation open calls. This one was called Track Attack, and the catch was that it had to include original music. And yes, I did make the music myself. Check out the Hellivision channel to see all the other things people made, catch a live screening near you, and submit your own animation to be part of this awesome collaborative experience. There's a new project every 6 months, and it's a great opportunity to make something fun and low effort, flex your skills, and meet new people. So like I said, I made this in 16 days, starting on March 1st and finishing on the 16th, which was the deadline. I pulled an all-nighter the last day so I could finish in time, which I don't really recommend doing because sleep is important, and I felt pretty messed up for the next 2 days. But in total, I put around 87 hours into the whole project, as you can see from this screen tracking app I use called Activity Watch. And in that time, I made this perfect specimen that has no flaws at all. So yeah, the time crunch meant that I had to cut some corners, and there are definitely mistakes. It felt like a great exercise though, because I had to figure out what to prioritize, and I think I did pretty well giving the audio and animation the most attention. If you don't want a long-winded response, this is the order I did everything. I had the idea, I wrote the dialogue, then the music, made the characters and the ship, rigged everything, and animated it, and in the last few hours, I made the environment and rendered it. For coming up with the idea, I was busy with a freelance project and I couldn't start until March 1st, so before that, I was just brainstorming and holding it all in my head. When I finally wrote something down, it was just this summary of the concept.
Astronaut visits an alien world. The aliens have a musical language. The universal translator is messed up and says gibberish and offensive things. The aliens kick the astronaut off the planet.
By the time I started working, my idea for what I wanted was really clear, and I think the only reason everything went so smoothly is because of that, the order I did everything, and what my priorities were. I knew music was going to be included because the theme of Track Attack was musical, and my immediate inspiration was from Men in Black 2 when Will Smith is talking to Biz Markie and his beatboxing alien language. I thought it could be fun to have aliens that communicate everything rhythmically and having failed communication be the punchline. So I wrote the dialogue first, which was pretty much exactly what was shown in the animation. Then I referenced that dialogue when I was making the music, which I'll talk about in a bit. But people want to know what my inspirations were first, so here's a big list. For animation, Looney Tunes and slapstick stuff like Tom and Jerry have a similar type of cartoon violence. Felix Colgrave's fluid animation style is always inspiring. Triplets of Belleville is one of my favorite movies specifically for the animation. Henry Selick is great, Leica Studios, and other stuff on this list. I also like absurd TikTok memes and typical brain rot stuff. For rigging, I really like how Olaf Berman's characters are put together with limbs that can move all over the place and have warping bodies. For music, I really like when there's a focus on rhythm. I play drums a little bit and enjoy odd time signatures and the mental puzzle of memorizing song changes. I do like pop music too, but that wasn't really an inspiration for this particular project. So I made all the music in a program called Bitwig that I bought a few years ago. I haven't put much time into learning it compared to Blender, so I usually stumble through projects whenever I use it and only focus on what I need for the end result. I also used my drum synth, the Electron Model Cycles, to help me get some rhythms down quickly. So I made some beats with that and recorded them onto MIDI tracks. Bitwig has this cool feature I found where you can record audio clips, right click and slice to drum machine, and it basically chops up the clip into equal amounts or where it detects sounds starting. And then you can throw a beat at it and it just kind of works. So I recorded myself making weird sounds and tried to figure out what would work for a kick, snare, cymbals. And that was pretty much just separating sounds based on pitch and how abrasive they were. I tweaked a lot of the individual sounds so that the samples would start at different parts of the clip, so they would sound a little more random. I also put this walkie-talkie effect on the astronaut. For making it match the dialogue, I pretty much went through and placed individual beats where the syllables could fall. and read it out loud over and over as I was doing it. Then I filled in the beat around it to add more details. For the rest, I just guessed how much space I might need between lines to allow room for acting, and I tried to make the end chaotic and escalate for the part where the alien gets mad and when the ship is out of control. This took me around 12 hours over the course of 3 days. I really thought I would have to tweak the music a few times if the animation didn't fit right, but it seemed fine, so the final audio is what I had on that third day. I started with the main astronaut and alien characters, but didn't plan their designs before starting, and they weren't looking very good to me. So I went to my sketchbook to test some shapes, and this is what I had when I went back to modeling. I used a lot of my character creator parts when I was putting them together. Like the head of the astronaut is mostly my creature creator parts, but then I went into edit mode and tweaked the shapes a little, and then joined them together and used the quad remesher add-on to get some decent topology pretty quickly. The rest of the body was mostly box modeling with the subdivision surface modifier. And I show how to do this in a lot of my character modeling tutorials. The buttons on the arm were placed with geometry nodes so that I could get a nice grid. And these wires were using the cable tool from my ScribbleGen product. The alien wasn't planned much beyond the basic body shape, so I made that and then just played around with the facial features until they were in a good spot. And again, most of these were from my character creator, including the hands and feet and even the hat and beard, but they were altered to match the shape a little better. This guy actually had this nose for a while, but people kept saying it looked like the pig from Angry Birds, so I changed it. I wanted to avoid texture painting to save time, so I used my palette for color variation, and I also used some vertex colors to make the inside of the mouth darker and the cheeks have a slightly different color. The skin texture is just a Voronoi texture used as a bump map to make it look like pores, and the hair is a wave texture affecting the bump. For all the other aliens, I duplicated this first one and then went into sculpt mode and pushed things around until they looked like different characters. And I also swapped some of the face parts out. The ship was all box modeling and I wanted it to be shaped like a bottle of soda, so I used that shape as a reference and then I exaggerated it a little. I've seen some videos of people throwing 2 liters that explode and shoot into the air, and I was like, I want the ship to look like that. Surprisingly, I think I only got one comment that mentioned the similarity. The environment was all made on the final day, and most of it was with a drawing tool that I've been working on, which you can find on Gumroad now. But it basically lets you draw a curve and then it fills it in and gives it volume to make it puffy. So that's how I made the mountains in the back and all of the grass and the plants on the ground. Then I threw some materials on to make the colors more random and to give things texture. A few people want to know the names of the characters and their races. So the astronaut is a race called Gorm, and their name is Gormy807, and the alien's race is Bootdadaloo Bootdat, and his name is... When people ask about the rig, I assume they're asking about how I got it to look so stretchy, and the answer to that is using a lot of stretch to constraints. I have a few videos on the second channel that go over basic setups, but if you want a step-by-step video, there is one on Patreon. Basically, I made a normal FK rig with all of the deforming bones that I needed, and at the tip of each bone, I put a new bone like this one, and then I make the deforming bone stretch to this new one. I do that for most of the bones, and then I can just control these ones to move the character around. In other rigging add-ons, this type of bone is usually called a tweak bone, and they squash and stretch because they try to automatically maintain the volume as they move around. You can add an IK setup on top of this too if you make bones to control these tweak bones. For my animation, I didn't have many rig controls. The astronaut has IK bones for the legs and a bone to move the whole arm. There's some bones to make the head more squishy, but that's kind of it. The alien has no IK or big control bones. I basically animated it by moving each tweak bone individually, which gave it some very funny movement, but it was pretty annoying to use a rig like this, so I would definitely add more controls if I did this again. Did I mention that on Patreon, you can get more detailed videos about how I make things in this video? Yeah, I think you mentioned that. Learn how to make stretchy rigs, animated text, get all the project files from my tutorials, and see videos early. If you like my animations and tutorials, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can make more. Before starting this project, I was working on a freelance animation gig, and it gave me the chance to practice character animation a lot and figure out some methods to get good results more quickly. The Wiggle Bones add-on helps a lot for getting free motion based on physics, and I've talked about this in a few of my videos. The problem is that you don't have that much control over how things move when you use it, so I actually didn't use it much for this project, mostly just for the arms when I didn't really want to animate them. The other thing that made animation easier is automatic keyframes. They basically make things like anticipation and overshoot easier, which is a big part of making things look smooth and natural. For example, here is a ball sliding into view, and I think it would look more natural if it didn't stop so suddenly. So I'll duplicate this last frame, press V, and change this to automatic. And now it overshoots a little before reaching its destination. And you can do this multiple times too. This also works really well with rigs. It's not a complete replacement for manual poses, but it can get pose-to-pose animation looking much better without a whole lot of effort. We can go into the graph editor to see what's happening under the hood. When you set a keyframe to automatic, it basically tries to keep the slope angle consistent instead of just smoothing into place like what you get with the default auto-clamped keyframe. Most of the animation I didn't need the graph editor for, but the times that I did use it, I was trying to make jumping or bouncing motions look better by making curves stop more suddenly. The NLA editor was also really useful for making the aliens bobbing up and down. I just made a looping animation that went to the rhythm of the music and put it on top of all of the other animation. And for certain parts, I would fade in and out if it looked out of place. I also have a video about the NLA editor for people who want to learn more. I talked about making the music, but animating to it is a whole other issue. I brought the track into the video sequence editor and enabled audio scrubbing over here, and that way I could hear it as I moved the playhead around. I wanted to make sure everything was on beat, and the track I made was 160 beats per minute, and the animation was 24 frames per second. So I had to do a little math to figure out how to line these up. So I multiplied 24 by 60 so that it was frames per minute instead of frames per second, and that gave me 1440. Then divide that by 160, and you get 9 frames per beat. I didn't plan any of this ahead of time, so I got pretty lucky that this was a clean number instead of a decimal, and it made it easy to stay on beat because I could just make all of the actions a multiple of 9 frames long. For lip syncing, I usually make a bunch of poses to save in the pose library, but I only made a few, like a closed mouth and an open mouth. Everything else was manual because I wanted the motions to not look too repetitive. I did duplicate some mouth shapes though to get close, and then I would just alter them to match what I thought the mouth shape would be. And the whole time I was posing, I was making the sounds out loud and thinking about how my mouth was shaped. People asked a lot about how I made this kid get all muscular after eating the beet, and it was pretty much just swapping models at the right time. I had this model that was rigged and everything, and I duplicated it with the rig. Then I went into edit mode and tried to make it as muscular as possible without adding too much new geometry, just scaling parts up and inflating the arms and stuff. For the abs, I did put some bevels to make them more defined. Then I tried to line the skeleton up so it was easier to pose, but I didn't have to weight paint anything because it was already done from the first model. For the transition, I started with a little bounce, and then I keyframed hiding this model and showing the next one. I think it ended up looking so seamless because I added a little bounce in there and because large parts of the models were the same. I could have tried shape keys to animate the body into a different shape, but I figured this would be easier and more immediate, and it did work pretty well. So when in doubt, you could always try just swapping the models. The kid picks up the beat, the main alien picks up the astronaut and the ship, and people want to know how to do that, how to pick things up. The main way is using a child of constraint. You can add it to an object or to a specific bone, then select what you want it to be parented to. So for this one, I wanted to make it a child of one of the alien's hand bones, and then you can animate this influence to make it basically parent and unparent. And when I move this hand, you can see that it's attached now. So I get to a part where the hands are grabbing the astronaut, then I insert a keyframe with the influence down, move one frame, and insert with the influence all the way up. It usually moves around, so I use the built-in add-on called Global Transform or the Copy World Space add-on. So you copy the pose right here and paste it over here. And that way the transition is smoother and the body isn't like jumping around to a different spot. I know there are add-ons that exist that make this process easier, and you can look them up if you want that, but I haven't used any of them. For the animated text, I use Blender's text object that's in the add menu, and then I put a geometry node setup on it to make it animate. And if you want a step-by-step video, there is one already on Patreon. But the basic idea is that I'm looking for separated mesh islands and deleting them over time to make letters appear or disappear. Once it's set up, you can change this value to decide what is shown. I also extruded it in here and added some noise to make it move around. And I animated most of this with constant interpolation, so I didn't have to worry about transitions, and I could make whole words pop in at once. For For the ship's exhaust trill and spoilers, the explosion at the end, I use this geometry node setup that I made. It's kind of like a less accurate version of Blender's particle system. It emits points from a volume and they scale down over time. And then you can instance things onto them, like the sphere that I used for the exhaust. Then I parented it to one of the ship's bones so that it followed the ship around. And whenever I wanted them to look very different, I just made a duplicate. Like for the trill at the end, there is one for the clouds spreading apart on the ground, one for this line shooting upward, and a separate one for the spiral in the sky. The ship animating as it spirals is just using a curve modifier that I turn on as soon as the ship is off screen, so then it follows that spiral that I drew. The explosion at the end is the same setup, except I swapped out the object to make it look more like fiery smoke, and I added this other option that leaves trails. The idea is that the previous frames aren't deleted and the new ones are just added on top of each frame. For the fire on the ship at the end, I took the ship model and remeshed it into one big blob, and then I made a geometry node setup that displaces it with a noise texture like this, but these two nodes right here make it so you can target only the parts that are facing behind the ship. So now it looks more like something moving really fast. And the shader is just a layer weight node controlling the color, and then I changed the transparency over time so that it gets brighter and more intense. What was challenging and what was rewarding about this project? While it was hard in general, trying to make something in such a short amount of time, I'd say the whole planning process and then managing time was a big challenge, but I was lucky to have a clear idea of what I wanted pretty early on, and then I just had to put in the hours and execute it. But also the process was really enjoyable, being able to see everything come together, and when I'm animating something silly, there are moments where it feels like I'm playing with toys and I'll be smiling and laughing because of the weird things I can make them do. So the reward is all kind of wrapped up in the hard work. I finished this with only a few hours to spare, so there are some mistakes that I would have liked to resolve. But overall, I think time challenges like this are great for getting projects moving and are probably good practice for people who struggle with perfectionism and finishing projects, because there's no time to be a perfectionist when you work this way. Another rewarding part of this is the sense of community. A bunch of other people participated and were posting updates on the Hellovision Discord server, and I even went to a screening in Toronto. We're in Canada. And I got to hang out with other animators and meet new people. I'll definitely be doing more projects like this in the future, so if you like my animation and want to help me make more, consider supporting me on Patreon. I already have a bunch of supporter exclusive videos, like step-by-step videos on how to make stretchy rigs, animated text, and behind-the-scenes videos, but also other things like my old Flash animations from high school. It would be really cool to eventually make enough money to hire someone to help me make these videos, so I could put more time into animation and just release more videos overall. So that's the goal right now. Any support is appreciated though, like watching my videos and sharing them with people. I'm grateful for all of that, so thank you. I have a few animation ideas. 3 of them are shorter and 1 is a little longer. The longer one is a mystery that takes place in a deli, and if you're on Patreon, then you already know about it. I share a lot of my ideas there, but I try not to spoil any of the endings. So yeah, mostly animations, some behind the scenes videos, and some tutorials that will most likely be on my second channel. Alright, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching and have a good one.